all, Boris Johnson is not acting like a true Conservative at the moment, says the former Brexit Minister Lord Frost. The unelected former negotiator, who then did not like the deal that he negotiated, has told the Mail on Sunday that the Tories need to be focusing on low-tax, free market policies instead of raising national insurance contributions. And while energy bills surge in price, it's the Labour Party who have proposed a cut in taxes on energy bills. Keir Starmer's party wants to scrap VAT from energy costs for the next year. So as the Tories put taxes up, Labour wants to cut them. It's a mixed-up, muddled-up, shook-up world, all right. Let's talk about the prospects for Boris Johnson and this move from Labour now with Harry Phipps, who is a writer for the Conservative Home website. Hello, Harry.
Good evening, Nick.
Your fur must be rubbed up the wrong way. We've got an unelected bureaucrat who's telling the government the direction of travel it should be going in.
Oh, I think most Conservative Party members, sort of Conservative MPs, Conservative voters for that matter, will strongly be agreeing with Lord Frost. He's not come up with anything terribly novel. I mean, he's articulated what well understood Conservative principles of wanting to have individual freedom, free enterprise, wanting to have the state small, not to have too much state control over our lives, not to have the state spending our money, but us being allowed to spend money for ourselves. Patriotism, the rule of law, traditional pride. I mean, these are strong Conservative principles, and the Conservative Party is not a sort of Boris Johnson fan club. I mean, ultimately the people who are Conservative have strong beliefs, and if they were socialist, they'd go off and join the Labour Party, and so they're wanting a Conservative government to follow Conservative principles.
It seems a bit presumptuous, though, of a man that we've only heard of because Boris Johnson made him a lord, telling the Prime Minister to change his policies, change his direction, change his advisers, and change his cabinet.
Oh, I think he's entitled. The Mail on Sunday asked him what his thoughts were. Obviously, he's been absolutely central to the Brexit negotiations, and although we're not there yet, obviously with arrangements for Northern Ireland, Liz Truss is having to try and pursue that. But I think fair-minded people would say he's done a lot of work on that, and it's been more.
Well, he's done a lot of work on it.
Some people might have thought. I mean,
really? How has he been?
Cast your mind back, Nick. There was a woman called Theresa May was Prime Minister, and there was struggle over getting anything through, and we were told it was all going to be impossible, and Brexit wasn't going to happen, and John Bercow was, the whole Parliament was descended into chaos. So no, I think David Frost, did a. Under very difficult circumstances, did a good job of that. But it's not really the point. It's not really about David Frost. It's about the issues, about what the government should be doing, what the purpose of a Conservative government is for. The people who went into supporting the Conservative Party had particular principles, and they're trying to pursue them.
I'm not sure that's right. I think that people, the reason that the Conservative Party has such a majority at the moment is not the Conservative Party, it's Boris Johnson. And to then turn round and attack the person that is responsible for them being in their jobs seems a bit rich.
I think that the last general election, there was a strong desire, which we very well know. There were two factors. The one was to get Brexit done, and the other was that the Labour Party had really a Marxist leader in Jeremy Corbyn, and so there was a strong. I mean, those were both very strong motives to vote Conservative, and certainly Boris Johnson, great, colourful personality, great popularity, certainly at the time. So that's all true. But also people do expect him to follow Conservative principles, which he's in the past has been very articulate about putting forward. I mean, through his journalism at The Spectator and the Telegraph, and when he was standing for leader of the Conservative Party, he was very much wanting to pursue an agenda of individual liberty, of cutting tax, of cutting bureaucracy. So I think it's reasonable for people in the Conservative Party to hold him to that. And by the way, I think they'd much prefer to have Boris Johnson continue, but to pursue those policies rather than to have a change of leader. I think that's where they're sort of dissatisfied with the policies, but I don't think there's a mood at this stage to wanting to have a change in the leadership.
Right, but these conservative principles that you outline, chief amongst which is low tax, I mean, that's not going to play well with the people that gave you this stonking majority, this red wall, because a low tax economy only favours or substantially favours the rich over the poor.
I completely disagree with that, Nick. I think that in many ways is the people who are on tight household budgets, who are facing cost of living pressures, that is most important for them to have tax cuts, and for them having to pay VAT on fuel, having to pay the increase in national insurance, is just as much, if not more, of a pressure than it is for the rich. So I think that's a misconception to think that somehow policies of free enterprise and wealth creation are only a benefit to the rich. I think they're a benefit to the whole country.
They substantially favour the rich over the poor, and the result is that you are left with an unhappier country. And the evidence for that is every time they have these World Happiness Index lists come out, the people of the happiest countries are always the ones at the very top of the tax list. The Scandinavian countries, for instance, they put the money in a pot and for the benefit of all.
I think if we look around the world and look at the countries with the most socialism, whether it's Venezuela, North Korea, Zimbabwe,
Denmark, Sweden, Finland,
there's much
Germany.
Happiness there. I think the free market, low tax economies are the ones that have great innovation and have a high standard of living for the great majority of the population. So I think that's the way. I mean, it's certainly what Conservatives would argue, that the way to economic prosperity is through free enterprise. That's the way to have economic growth, and that's of general benefit to the population as a whole.
Yeah, well, OK, we could sit here and argue about that all night long. I'm not going to convince you, and you're not going to convince me. So you're in touch with the grassroots of the Conservative Party. Are they through with Boris Johnson? And if so, who would they prefer? Who do they think is a election winner?
Oh, I think, as I mentioned, I think the very strong desire is to see him get back on course in terms of his providing policies that they would regard as Conservative policies. And it may well, I mean, for example, with Brexit, we've inherited a huge amount of EU regulation, and there's only been very small progress in terms of scrapping it. Now, I mean, it may well be that will. I mean, Boris Johnson has said in his New Year message that he's going to try and become a bit more radical in cutting some of that bureaucracy. Well, I think if he delivers on that,
it's an impossibility. You must know as well as I do that leaving a free trading area like the EU is going to increase bureaucracy, because you're going to have red tape for each and every single country that you do a trade deal with, rather than have just one set.
Well, what I'm talking about is more generally than that. There's lots of regulation in terms of people. Well, we were discussing VAT, and obviously, if we were still in the European Union, there's no possibility of us being able to cut VAT. But
well, you can. I mean, individual countries can set their own VAT above a certain level, as you probably know. But let's not get into the ins and outs of Brexit.
It's a vast. I mean, it's very, very boring, but it's a vast quantity of stuff which the regulatory burden that we've inherited from the European Union is holding back our economy by many.
We're still blaming the European Union for the regulation that we are suffering under. Okay, well,
that's absolutely the point is that we can't.
But back to my question about Boris Johnson. So you can't think that you don't think that he's going to change. This is who he is. Everybody knows who he is, and he's going to continue to be who he is for the rest of his life. So, if that's the case, and the Conservative grassroots are upset with him and his direction of travel, and they've just realised who they've elected as leader, who else? Who do they want?
I disagree with that characterisation of it. I mean, his personality obviously is there, but in terms of what he actually does in terms of his policies, I think there's a lot of hope that he will start to, because absolutely, as you say, we can't blame the EU now. We've got independence, and it's up to us to make these decisions. And there's a lot of hope that he will deliver on that. But
all right, well, let's talk hypothetically then. Assuming that he doesn't change, let's just do that. So who would the list include then to replace him as far as the grassroots of the Conservative Party goes?
Well, there's Liz Truss and Rishi Sunak are regarded as the front runners, which may mean that they don't end up getting there, because often the history of these things is that it's not always a benefit to be a front runner. And there's Jeremy Hunt, of course, who stood last time.
Well, he remains unaffected by the current regime, but you can't possibly. I mean, why does Liz Truss's name keep coming up? I mean, it's hard to damp down a smirk when people suggest that she could be the Prime Minister of this country. You can't be serious.
Well, I think obviously people who are sort of hostile to the Conservative Party would probably be hostile to most of them. But people who are conservatives would tend to think that she had strong conservative messages. I mean, she's obviously had success in terms of free trade negotiations in a previous job in terms of Australia.
That's an interesting use of the word success there, Harry.
Oh, I think there's been great in terms of some of the ridiculous suggestions that we would be sort of cutting ourselves off from the world. There's been there's been great success in terms of not just
crawling across the carpet on our knees with a begging bowl out. Yeah, I agree.
Some of the Project Fear, the sort of doom mongering,
has been shown to be true.
And when we managed, well, I think that I'm astonished that you would claim that.
Well, I can't believe that you would level this argument at me. That you would claim this defence. It seems extraordinary in the face of all of the evidence to the contrary.
Well, it's a statement of fact that we've had these free trade.
Well, yes, she negotiated one with Australia, and the benefit of that will be £1 per household per year. What will we spend the money on?
Well, I think we'll see how that works out. But no, I think in terms of other potential people, I think there's obviously Jacob Rees-Mogg is a great former
Prime Minister. Really, the problem that you have, the problem that the Conservative Party have, is that they're going to follow. If Boris Johnson is, he's going to leave at some point, but you're following a huge act. And he is a person that reaches the parts that other politicians can't reach. So whoever is going to follow him has got massive shoes to fill, regardless of what you think about Boris Johnson or his policies. That's going to be a huge problem for your party, because if you don't pick someone who can reach the people that Boris Johnson, the sort of people who are averse to politicians, and it's not any of the people that you've mentioned so far. Is there somebody on the outside, perhaps?
Oh, I think it could. I mean, one of the things is that I think it's quite likely is that Boris Johnson will be there for some time. That he'll go on to the next general election, probably win the next general election. And so we'll be looking at. In fact, there won't be something. It'll be this year or even next year. It'll be several years' time, and then it's quite likely there will be. Somebody who's not in the cabinet, and somebody who's not. Particularly well known. I agree that's perfectly plausible.
Right. Okay. Good to talk to you, Harry. Thanks for that.
Okay. All right.
Harry Phibbs, writer for Conservative Home website. So you've probably heard what this Lord Frost has been saying, that he thinks that, despite the fact that nobody in this country has voted for the man, he's only being interviewed for a newspaper because Boris Johnson stuck him up the House of Lords. But he says that they're going in the wrong direction. They're not following Conservative principles. And in a really bizarre turn of events, it seems that the Labour Party are proposing the kind of thing that you would expect ordinarily from the Conservative Party, i.e. tax cuts. And that word ordinarily is underlined and in bold. We're not living in ordinary times, that's for sure. So what are your thoughts? 0345 6060 973. This is LBC. So this former Cabinet Minister Lord Frost warned today that Boris Johnson must reset his government along traditional Conservative lines if he is to avoid defeat at the next general election. Wow, they're thinking about that already. Well, I suppose politicians do have that in mind at all times. Lord Frost called on Johnson to revitalise the country with what he said free markets, free debate and low taxes, and set the direction of travel to appeal to ordinary voters. Well, free markets is what we had before we left the European Union under his inept guidance. Low taxes benefits the rich massively more than the rest of us, and free debate, well, we have that already. What's he talking about? It might make you wonder what or who exactly is Lord Frost and what it's got to do with him. I mean, he's only a lord because Boris Johnson wanted him to be in the cabinet for some reason. He thought that he would be the best person to negotiate our deal with the EU. Well, we all make mistakes. So he stuck him in the House of Lords because otherwise he couldn't have been in the cabinet, as he wasn't elected by anyone. You didn't elect him. I didn't vote for him. Nobody did. One of those unelected bureaucrats that Brexiters profess to hate so much. He's the bloke that negotiated a deal with the EU that he said was a terrible deal pretty much the moment he signed it. And now he's trying to set the direction of travel for the whole country. The chap that used to be the PR man for the Scotch whisky industry. Has the title of Lord gone to his head? 0345 6060 973. He quit the government in December, you remember, after he said he'd become disillusioned with Boris Johnson over COVID restrictions and tax rises and net zero green policies. Not the 150,000 dead or the shortage of staff that fled after we yelled at them to get out of our country for 5 years. Not the catastrophic fall in the GDP that we've suffered, probably the worst of any G7 country. None of that. That's the reason that he gave. Disillusionment about COVID restrictions, tax rises and net zero green policies. I mean, you might think that he quit as chief negotiator because he was outmanoeuvred at every turn by the far more skilled and competent EU negotiators and signed a deal that he himself said was so bad that it needed to be renegotiated the moment his signature had dried on the paper. I mean people bellyache about rewriting history all the time. That's it in a nutshell. He makes clear that he doesn't want Boris Johnson to stand down, but to change his policies and the people around him. Now, if this was America, you'd say that sounds like a coup. The chap appears to have risen without trace from one bureaucratic job to the next and has never been elected by anyone. I mean, maybe we should ask Boris Johnson's tailor what he thinks, or the number 10 cat. Say what you like about the Prime Minister, at least he's had the politeness to actually be placed in his position by some of the people of this country. 0345 6060 973. Oxford, hello Peter.
Hello Nick, hi. It's very good to hear some common sense on LBC. I think I'm on the same page as you on almost everything you've said. But, I mean, Lord Frost comes from a background of being pro-Remain. I mean, he's quoted repeatedly before 2016 as saying that to leave the European Union would be a big mistake. He's done an about turn on that. He's done an about turn on the withdrawal agreement. Having signed it, he recanted it almost immediately and said it was unsatisfactory. And he's obviously a very weak negotiator. He thinks in two dimensions and in monochrome. He doesn't in any way match the negotiating power of his opposite numbers in the EU, nor indeed, of course, does Britain have anything like the same strength of negotiation as the EU. And these negotiations are, and always were going to be, very, very difficult for the UK. Now, I mean, where I'm coming from is that I believe that having left the EU was a very, very dirty step for the country in terms of not only the economy, as you rightly say, but also in terms of the social cohesion of this country and in terms of the quality of life for British people. Think about Erasmus, think about the right to work and travel and so on. I should say I'm Irish and I'm a doctor. And many people in the health service are very, very upset about the effect that Brexit has had on provision of care for patients. We've lost, a very large portion of our doctors and nurses, and they aren't going to be replaced in any comparable way. So, I mean, this has been catastrophic, and it just feels like as if people like your friend Harry, who's just been on, are in total denial about this. They just don't understand the damage that their policies have done, and they talk about the benefits of being able to agree trade deals with countries like Australia, when quite clearly, proximity matters and quality matters, and the country has suffered, the agricultural industry has suffered massively and will suffer for the foreseeable future if this goes ahead. So I really don't have any brief with Lord Frost. Unfortunately, now he's in the House of Lords. He is a part of the legislature of this country for life, because that's how it works. And I think we could do with much better people than him influencing government policy.
All right, thank you, Peter. 0345 6060 973. Some texts and tweets and so on. Addy says, Lord Frost is another Conservative talking nonsense about free markets and needing to have low taxes for the rich. Remember, it was the Conservatives who gave away our drinking water supply to private monopolies. Not much free marketeering going on there. I think that maybe the concern follows an enormous election win and the big gap between them and the Labour Party, which until recently has been huge. And then, just lately, they've crossed over, and the Labour Party, for a brief period, and I think we're still in it, but it's the window of opportunity is narrowing. For the Labour Party is sort of polled above the Tories, and that's probably freaking them out, even now, this far away from the next general election. And what's probably concerning them is that the policies that they're talking about, low tax and, I can't remember what else it was he said, but all of the arguments that he put forward, free markets and, all of that stuff that really benefits the wealthy, almost certainly at the expense of the poor, it's always worked for them up to now. And Boris Johnson seems to be doing some of the things. I mean, you could pick apart practically everything that he's done in the 2 years that he got in, but some things appear to be the kind of policies that the Labour Party might put forward, and they're probably pulling back from that because it's not what's worked for them in the past. Bizarrely, poor people seem to vote for the concept of tax cuts as though it's going to do them a favour. But just do the maths. I mean, it's pretty basic stuff. If you're on $200,000 a year and the tax rate is, say, 40%, then that's 80 grand. If they drop it to 30%, then it's 60 grand, and you've saved £20,000 a year if you're on 200,000 a year. But most people aren't. Most people are on more like they're on 20,000 a year. And so under the similar tax cut, I mean, I know that this isn't exactly how it works, but this is just, an illustration. If you're on 20 grand a year, you'll save 2,000 a year. The rich save 20,000 and you save 2,000. Now, okay, 2,000 is important, but it by those figures, it obviously benefits the wealthy much more than it benefits the poor. And yet the poor have been persuaded that it is in their interests to go for a sort of a winner-takes-all society. And I go back to that point about the happiness index. I mean, I know it seems superficial and a bit silly to even talk about happiness, but what's life about if it's not about happiness? And if some countries, over and over and over again, are the happiest people in the world, well, maybe we should be doing something along their lines rather than along the lines of America, which is where we seem to be going, both on, as far as tax is concerned and the health industry is concerned. We seem to be going along the American line of winner takes all, and which is great if you're a winner, but there's precious few of them. Some people call them the 1%. I may be getting much of this wrong, in which case you can correct me. 0345 6060 973. It's 10:30 on LBC, the news headlines with Zora Solomon. So Lord Frost, an unelected bureaucrat, has determined that this country is going in the wrong direction. He said the Prime Minister has a right, when he wants something to happen, for the levers that he pulls to actually produce something, and he has the right to the best possible advice around him. I wonder if he can hear himself. The Prime Minister told him to negotiate a great Brexit deal, and absolutely no one thinks he did that, including himself. He said, so I think there needs to be machinery changes, and there probably need to be some different voices around him to make sure that he gets the best possible advice. Setting out a manifesto for post-Brexit Britain, Lord Frost says, I think we need to focus on rebuilding the nation and be proud of our history. Oh, God, more culture wars, more flags, more denial of the truth about our history. That national anthem at midnight thing on television, more pictures of the Queen. Why is anybody paying attention to this man? 0345 6060 973. Woodford Green. Hello, Johnny.
Hi, Nick. How you going?
Good, thanks.
Right. Listen, I'm really sort of fascinated about your attitude towards inequality.
Okay.
You've got a really good basis for, explaining the inequalities that people experience. Right. The higher echelons, if you want £80,000 a year, etc., it doesn't touch you, Could I just give you my experience over the last 2 days?
Of what?
I've just left St George's Hospital. My girlfriend has just had a triple bypass. I've cycled 10 miles in the cold weather, and come back, and I'm just worried about putting my heating on, and I'm sort of thinking, well, cracky, in come April, I won't be able to afford to be able to put this heating on.
Right, well, Labour are addressing that. You're not the only one. They're saying that they, under their leadership, they would cut bills by up to £600 for the worse off if the Labour Party were in power. But, of course, they're not. They're not going to be any time soon. So it's easy to say that. But they are addressing it nevertheless. Shadow Chancellor Rachel Reeves said the party would scrap VAT for a year and impose a windfall tax on North Sea producers to tackle the emerging cost of the living crisis. They priced it £6.6 billion, they said, which would include removing VAT on domestic energy bills for a whole year, and they'd expand and increase the warm homes discount for those most at risk. Boris Johnson said that cutting VAT was a good reason to leave the European Union. But that's perhaps just another one of those Brexit promises that's disappeared on the wind the moment that we were persuaded to vote out. The tax would reduce average bills by about £200, which is not really going to put much of a dent in your bill if what they say comes true, and it's going to reach £2,000 a year. Thanks, Johnny. Felicity in Spain says that Spain brought down the VAT on electricity bills from 21% to 10% 2 months ago. Neil says £2,000 a year our energy bill, quote, has gone up by. Blimey. Gone up by £2,000 a year. Are you running a swimming pool? He says, bye-bye holiday. Brexit's pushing prices up at supermarkets, such as through the lack of lorry drivers. There's no one to work in farms, etc. The Tories are a self-serving elite. Nout else, he says. That's how he put it. Nout else. Stockport. Hello, Matthew.
Hello there.
Matthew.
Yeah, so, it's, the Lord Frost thing, I don't understand what else they can deregulate. Because when Thatcher started the privatisation and stuff like that, and she privatised all what were the state-owned utility companies and what have you. They made up about 60% of the economy, and now they're all private monopolies. So what else is there to deregulate? And for a party that's dominated UK politics for over 100 years. They're the party that's been in 70% of the time of the last 100 years. So how come, if they have all the great ideas, how come nothing's ever fixed if they've been in the power the majority of the time?
They do have the ability, and it seems extraordinary, but they seem to have the ability to sell the idea that only by voting for the Conservative Party can this country get over the consequences of voting in the Conservative Party. People seem to buy that over and over again.
And they go on about how much they've... You see, whenever a Labour government's come in, they've always come in around a time when the Conservative administration has basically run out of steam. So in the 60s, it ran out of steam. Thatcher, Major, it ran out of steam. And so the Labour Party sort of like benefited from that. And then when the Labour Party's been in power, there's been some sort of like financial crisis, which has then put the Conservatives back in because people think the Conservatives are a safe pair of hands. But as a whole, the Conservatives tend to borrow more money for daft projects, giving their contracts to the friends in PPE contracts and wasting money like that.
Well, it's an odd period that we've just gone through, but this party has not covered itself in glory. We had a combination of the worst death rate and the worst economic hit of practically any other major economy on earth.
Yeah, but the frustrating thing is sometimes they have an inability to recognise the consequence of their decision. So the reason why we have all these...
I think the reason why is because people forget the consequences of their decisions when it comes to voting at the ballot box. So they have learned their lesson, and their lesson is that they can pretty much get away with anything they like.
Yeah, so the reason, I think you mentioned before that Boris Johnson can reach parts of the country. You see, he's a seasonal campaigner, so he's always in campaign mode. So he's always going to pull a crowd. He's always going to be entertaining, and he's in that campaign. And people that have said that when you actually meet him, he gives that sort of like air and enthusiasm around him. I'm not saying that actually there's no substance there, but in terms of that, we live in that soundbite 1 second news media. As long as you say something, it doesn't matter it's wrong, because you're going to say something else the next day and somebody would have forgotten it. So he is a seasoned campaigner, and he knows with the 24-hour news and that as long as he can keep the agenda going, at some point there's going to be another election, and he can be in that sort of like campaign mode. So what Labour have got to do, they've really got to, when the Conservatives call Labour out for actually the things that they've done, Labour should push back and say, no, that's wrong. I wonder if Keir Starmer is actually the man to do that. I just can't see it. I think that if he was going to be the person to put Labour back into power, then we'd have noticed some effect of his leadership up to now. But he's been practically invisible. In fact, most of what he says seems to be backing up what Boris Johnson said last. And the amount of open goals that he's been presented with that he's failed to score in is, they're just beyond count now. I think the Labour Party needs to do what the Conservative Party would do in their position. If the position was swapped and the Conservative Party had a leader that wasn't cutting through, they'd have got rid of him by now. Because time's ticking, and you're always looking at the next general election, the next local elections, and so on, because people, their jobs are on the line, and they want to keep them or cling on to power more than anything else, and they will do anything in order to do that. But the Labour Party, on the other hand, they just don't seem to be concentrated on that at all. They're perpetually in a purity contest, and I just don't see it with Keir Starmer. I just don't see. Perhaps if the Conservatives dropped Boris Johnson and replaced him with someone like Liz Truss, then maybe he'd have a chance. But other than that, I think it's a hopeless task. Thanks for that. This text says, anyone can make worthless promises when spending other people's money. Labour nearly bankrupted Britain twice when they were last in government. Well, look at our finances now.
Julia says the average income tax is 40% in France. The motorways are amazing. The hospitals are wonderful. Their schools are smaller and also more effective. Higher taxes gives us a better environment. Well, for most of the people, relatively high taxes benefits them disproportionately. For a very, very few number of people, lower taxes benefits them disproportionately. And that's the sort of big lie, that people have been persuaded to vote against their interests. It's a pretty neat trick, and they pull it over and over and over again.